West Ham 0, Arsenal 6 was the most fluid and interchangeable we've seen Arsenal all season. And I think that comes in a change in tact from Mikel Arteta as he looks to rediscover that unpredictability that Arsenal showed they were devastatingly capable of in pre-season. And this 6-0 result becomes veritable proof that the underlying numbers and metrics that Arsenal have topped in the league since November have some serious staying power. In today's tactical analysis, I will divulge how unpredictable Arsenal are definitely back, and how Ben White's evolving role today was absolutely pivotal. How Arsenal are also beginning to use the half-space cross to much greater abundance and effect. But first, rotations, and many more rotations than we're used to. The feature of Arsenal's pre-season was this sort of fluid rigidity that we saw against West Ham today. Fluid rigidity which essentially means all the key areas of the pitch are constantly occupied, whilst a certain degree of freedom is afforded to which individual occupies each position. And look, mostly when Arsenal have done this, we saw last season to great effect with our sort of left-hand sided pod of Zinchenko, Xhaka, Martinelli and Jesus often and readily interchanging. Instead, this season, we've seen a more rotatable right-hand sided box for Arsenal of the centre-forward, Saka who's allowed to drift inside more, Odegaard with that greater freedom to dictate, and the right centre-back operating in the half-space or holding the width, and maybe even Declan Rice sometimes joining too. However, largely we've been much more strict positionally this season for many reasons that I've already touched on. But until now, within minute 1 today, we saw Havertz and Martinelli, also Trossard, all taking up the left centre mid / left shadow striker berth, the left wing and centre mid positions. Like I said, all in the first minute. And we saw all of these roaming even into that right-hand-sided interior role at times as well, between the lines, when Odegaard was that option deeper, moving into the pivot in our 4-2-4 shape. And look, these rotations, of course, are a brilliant way to disrupt West Ham's attempts of a settled 4-5-1 block, and also it gives the optimal environment, I think, for the players on the pitch, giving Trossard pockets of space to use and to utilise his associative play with, which is always made more efficient, I think, when he plays centrally from the false nine, and it creates, I think, a dynamic looking team with and the key, I think, which is the variety in solutions to solve deep defences, whether that is Trossard dropping deeper in between the lines to overload that West Ham press, leaving space for Havertz to assume centrally and offer that central progression that we have struggled for large portions of this season, mostly because of Partey and Ewan Timber's unavailability. And look, we even saw a Trossard and White double pivot this afternoon, and these rotations and this Trossard and White pivot was what ultimately caused the Saka penalty. And Ben White is the most intriguing thing to come out of today. And this is the best solution, I think, to solving problems, solving absences and injuries that Arteta has shown. But for this to be explained and investigated and analysed, we have to literally take things back a little bit, because unpredictable Arsenal are back and Ben White may just be the man for this. Because till now, I think the closest we have ever seen Ben White from inverting from fullback into midfield for Arsenal was his role in that 2-3 axis against Barcelona in pre-season. Again, we're going back to pre-season and the unpredictability we showed there, with him and Timber sharing sort of the secondary controller roles alongside Thomas Partey, but neither hardly inverted. It was very wide roles, right? Today was the first time in his career that he has truly inverted. And why is this so important? Well, with Martin Odegaard drifting into that 4-2-4 shape that we do in our deep and initial build-up, in order to progress into our 3-2-5 in settled play, and remember, we would need that 3-2 axis in rest defence with 5 players because of the threat of Kudus and Bowen in transition for West Ham. But to transition into this shape in settled play, we need someone to move into that pivot as Odegaard then drifts higher in between the lines as that sort of normal quintessential right interior number 10 role, right? And normally Zinchenko has inverted, of course, from left back for Arsenal, but Arteta's vision, and this is something I've preached so much, Arteta's vision for sort of the fullback, the inverted fullback going forward, from whichever side, left or right, is a much more malleable one going forward, because from the left or the right. He wants them to be able to, of course, invert into that pivot, but also hold the width like White has done in attack as that wide fifth man, and not just invert into that pivot, but invert higher in between the lines like we've seen Tomiyasu do. And this is what Jurrien Timber gives us, that dynamism, that technical security to play in the pivot, but that dynamism to play higher up as well. And of course, if he wants, you can just stay in that 4-2-4 and remain at left back, because Timber, Tomiyasu, White, they all give us that extra defensive stability, 1v1 capabilities and athleticism that typically Zinchenko wouldn't. And it's about responsibility and different dynamics and taking responsibility off players, pressure off players for Arsenal, having numerous solutions, which is the key. Suddenly, Ben White being able to invert now, it gives us an unpredictability and many solutions of how we form that 3-2-5 shape. Because if neither Kiwior or White invert reliably, of course it makes it harder for us to find and form that 5 attacking setup in the last line. Ben White inverting solved that today, giving us another solution to form that 3-2-5 and deal with the absences of Partey and Zinchenko, and not giving Odegaard and Rice too much responsibility where we can become slightly predictable. What is more, I've just spoken about rotations, of course. Ben White continued to interchange, I think, with Kiwior, who still occasionally inverted, but also, most importantly, with Martin Odegaard, and this is where Saka's second goal and the 5th Arsenal goal comes about from. White moves from the pivot into that wide 5th man, and in the chaos between Odegaard and White and the interchanges where Martinelli, Trossard, Havertz are all popping up in different areas, this allows Saka to drift inside into the half space. When I mean it, he's one of the deadliest players on the planet. With Emerson sort of left in no man's land, I mean, pundits have used this sort of to criticise West Ham's defensive organisation, but equal praise needs to go to the greater number of solutions Arteta is finding to break down blocks, and this is the key coverage, obviously, on the channel. In recent weeks, we have to approach space differently with different speeds and different setups. And with White as well in that pivot, it also created an interesting tweak to our back 3 axis. Saliba now was showing off his sort of more progressive capabilities from that outside right centre-back role and carrying much more. And Gabriel, in turn, was shifted to a central centre-back role, and he made a much more impressive showing as that central centre-back than he did in pre-season, and it just shows how he's come on leaps and bounds in his maturity on the ball and his temperament, picking the right pass at the right time, trying to be, or give us another option in case, hopefully Saliba doesn't get injured, but another pillar/organiser option in the middle of the back 3. It's something that we're lacking at the moment, especially with the injuries and unavailabilities of Timber and Tomiyasu. And as this is probably getting onto, it's not just a better solution for the collective of Arsenal, but individuals as well. And of course, you don't need to rotate all the time. It's in specific game states. For example, Liverpool, we needed much more sort of static positions and the occasional rotation, because I think we needed more of that central presence of Havertz to play over the man-man press, to be that box dominator, that outlet and generate threat right centrally. But this gets more out of players such as Martinelli, gets him closer to goal. And today, sometimes he was popping up on the right wing, or even the right interior. Odegaard also finds himself increasingly in central positions, verging, of course, sometimes in that inside left channel, which is much more optimal body angles, incidentally, for him, as we've always discussed on the channel. It allows him to be that anchor on that sort of left central midfield position, as opposed to becoming that dynamic moving part as he is sometimes on the right, sort of doing that dual role of dynamism, overlapping Saka when the conditions for White aren't there, and also being that primary creator. But on that left, he is the anchor, and there's moving parts around him purely instead. Now, obviously, like I said, rotations and unpredictability do not instantly mean Arsenal go and win the league. But what it shows is Mikel Arteta is trying to solve the only really 2 criticisms I've ever aired on this channel of him, and the only ones I've ever had, which is, I mean, they're not even really criticisms, but you just have to have this ascendancy and the fine margins right when you're competing with Pep Guardiola. And the 2 are not being loose and limber enough with the squad, and not sort of platforming players correctly, or sort of waiting too long to do so. And his vision and his visions in pre-season a sort of part of what we've seen against West Ham today more and more, and taking place since that Dubai winter break. Mainly sort of Arsenal have had, though, we have got to remember 3 to 4 starters out of the team through injury or unavailability since the start of the season, and this has disabled the unpredictability that I've covered in depth. I sort of combine all of this and these growing interchangeability of this Arsenal side, okay, with the incredible dual capacity we still had today over the pitch, with of course Kai Havertz's inclusion and Odegaard's growing responsibility as that second phase presence in this team, our increasing interchanges which take the responsibility off the inverted fullback all the time and allow us to play a more out-and-out defender in, for example, Jakub Kiwior. The lineup from Arteta was spot on today, and the press, of course, was adjusted accordingly as well, with Trossard the front man in our 4-1-4-1 zone before Odegaard triggered and joined him in that front two, switching us into a 4-4-2 man-to-man press. Remember, Arsenal are the best out-of-possession side, in my opinion, in the world. We can manage and block space, but we can also suffocate sides, especially with that Rice Havertz pivot in behind that front two. But to finish, I want to look at half-space crosses because I think, I don't have any stats to go along with this, but I sort of know anyway that this is the most we have done this season. And what I mean by half-space crosses are those little cute ones in and around the box, in those inside left and right channels. And it's a great way, and arguably the best source of sort of deviant chance creation versus low blocks, and it is the half-space cross. I think what the left shadow striker in Kai Havertz, that sort of method and system allows us to do, as I've described, is cheating the opposition at times with an additional centre-forward in the box, and you can see sort of the spaces at times between the West Ham centre-backs today. Trossard had a couple of opportunities aerially. Unfortunately, we didn't get too many drop to Havertz, but if you sort of accompany this with the set-piece dominance, you can see this growing ability, I think, to get the crosses into players. And especially with the rotations we showed today, half-space crosses become so much easier. We can pull West Ham defenders in and out of position and then have the Arsenal players themselves arriving onto the ball much later to deliver the ball into the box and create really good chances, because we have the quality to do these half-space crosses and to be devastating with them. And I think Xhaka was the biggest source of us for those last season, and was sort of really willing in his mentality to put the ball into the box at times. But in conclusion, look, this result has been coming for Arsenal, and it shows, I think, a fully refreshed and limbered side post-Dubai winter break. As I've said sort of the whole season, we are really in this title race and will be very close there come the end of the season, despite not having the full options available squad-wise the whole campaign. You know, a few poor results do not change the upswing in performances we've seen post-November. And this sort of output that we're generating from a squad with conditions not fully available for them is a really, really good sign. But that is all from me in today's tactical analysis. I really hope you enjoyed the game and the video. I only ask you to like, comment and subscribe right at the end of the video, of course, because hopefully that means you've enjoyed it in any way, shape or form, or found it insightful in any way you derive that from. But that is all from me. I've been Harvey Gratian. It's great to have you over with the channel. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.